Segment 3, Gold and Black Live. This is the first 2 females on the show at the same time. That's a good
Is it
thing.
really?
I
About
think.
time.
No, that's not true.
No, it's been. We've had women's basketball players here, and I've been on those segments too.
I know.
And Nancy Cross.
Yeah, that's true. That's the third
Okay.
stupid thing I've said because I want to go back. I am now. I told Dr. Shoop I wasn't gonna go back, but now I am. I did not. The reason why I said Matt Painter might not ever be on the show again had nothing to do with his status as the head coach. It is the fact that just like Marcia might feel after being on the show today, she never wants to come back. Well, we say the same thing with Matt. And I said something else that was about firing up your computer to send me an email when you are, in fact, watching this on your computer or your tablet. So excuse me. I'm sorry for that. Welcome to the show, and thank you for
It's
joining us.
wonderful to be here.
This is I've really looked forward. I've probably done as much research on this topic heading into preparation for an interview as I ever have, and I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed your book, and Kim, if you want to put that up just so we have that, so our folks can read that when you get a chance. But obviously, the book "Touchdown for Jesus and Other Signs of Apocalypse."
Yes.
One of the key words there is it's not the apocalypse, it's apocalypse. First, explain why you wrote the book, and Marcia has, and I'll let you talk after I keep rambling on here, but Marcia's obviously has you want to talk about your background a little bit
Sure.
and what that all brought to the fore.
Sure. Well, I'm an ordained minister, but I also have a PhD in religious studies from Emory University. So I'm a theologian, I'm an ethicist, and I also look at things through the lenses of things like gender and race and, kind of social theoretical categories. So being a coach's wife gives me a lot of material for my work. But John and I, for several years, because John was actually a religion major in college. I don't know if people know that about him, but for several years we have done talks together about sports and religion and the theology of sport. So this book has been in the making for a long time, but really it was after what we went through at University of North Carolina with an NCAA investigation that the book became a moral imperative for me. And it changed a bit about what it was going to be like, and that's where the apocalypse part comes from, which I could say a little bit about if you'd like.
Please, by all means.
A lot of people, when they hear the term apocalypse, they think the end of the world. And apocalypse, actually, the literal, theoretical, and theological meaning of it is an unveiling of the truth. So it really is not about the end of things. It's actually about new beginnings. And that is what this book invites, is a way to get back to some of the redemptive aspects of sports, particularly big-time sports, by way of looking at some of the distortions and what I call the demons that afflict big-time sports these days. And we're hearing a lot about them in the news. So apocalypse is really actually a very invitational orientation to things. It's an orientation open to change, open to transformation, open to new life.
Though it does take some getting used to as you read it in the book, because
Yes.
you tend to come back to that all the time.
How would you define yourself? I mean, you just kind of reeled off all of these. I mean, how do you see yourself?
Well, for a long time, I felt like I needed something to call myself. For several years, while John was coaching in the NFL, I was a parish minister.
Yeah.
And that didn't work real well. With, his job was big on Sundays and my job was big on Sundays. So when he went into college football, I really shifted gears, and parish ministry wasn't really working great for our family. So I became more of a freelance author and theologian. So if I had to sum myself up, I would say I'm a freelance theologian and author, but also a mother and a football coach's wife and all that stuff. And a middle school cross-country coach. I want to throw that in, too.
Really?
Yes.
Yes, you were a college-level cross-country runner, and that probably tests you in its own right, to coaching you in middle school.
It's
cross
awesome.
country. Yeah.
I love it.
One of the topics in the book that I found interesting, it kind of hits you on the front end of the book, is the term phantasm, and in your experience, a difficult one. In 2002, as the coach's wife, but the experience in the stands at Soldier Field, and experiencing fans' venom towards not only the Chicago Bears offense, but maybe even your husband at a time. Now that's been 12 years ago, but you still have to experience that from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
What's the lesson there?
Well, it's an important lesson, I'll say, because back in Chicago, I think my impulse was to try to correct people. And I wanted them to know the real story. I wanted them to know the truth. And that just cultivated a lot of anger and frustration and sadness for me. And so I think what I learned in the story I tell here, where I sort of lost it, in the stands in Soldier Field, when I had listened to, several hours of someone talking about different ways to kill my husband and see him out of the city, that
I don't know why I'm laughing. It's a nervous laughter. I'm having a bad day.
Creepy.
Just leave me alone here, okay? I'm not laughing at all.
But anyway, I learned that it was important for me to practice being the kind of person I want to be in that space. And I don't want to be an angry person, and I don't want to think all human beings are idiots. I don't, and a lot of people that are inside the world of sports will say, oh, they're just idiots, or they're just nuts. And I don't want to feel that way about my fellow human beings. So I think the Phantasm chapter really was almost like a therapeutic exercise in how can I extend grace to the fans? How can I put them in a different framework? And for me, it really is about that everybody is there, whether we're conscious of it or not. Everybody's there with this desire that redemption be a true possibility in human life. And we want to be an impact player in that. We want to be able to make a difference. We want things to work out the way we hope they will. And so that fan that was upset with my husband things weren't going the way he wanted them to. And if I could have just, instead of tapping him on the shoulder and telling him who I was, if I could have tapped him on the shoulder and say, tell me more about how long you've been a football fan. How long have you been a Bears fan? It seems like you're really frustrated. That kind of thing. If I had the capacity at the time to not take it so personally, I think that could have been a more constructive moment than it was.
Why do you think, and one thing you said, is nowhere else in life are we authorized to express these full-bodied emotions, yelling when you're upset, yelling when you're happy,
Yes.
calling somebody out. Why do you think it is that way, I guess, in sports? And should we allow ourselves to be like that? I Colts Pirates fan,
Yeah.
I do that.
Yeah, John wanted me to be
Yes.
sure to acknowledge that you're a Pirates fan.
Yeah. He did the thumbs up the other day.
Yeah. They're doing well.
They are.
Yes.
See, there it is.
Yeah.
Control. Go ahead.
But I for me, it really isn't about whether that's good or bad. But let us observe the phenomena and kind of see what truth we can get out of it. Instead of saying that's bad or you shouldn't do that, we do it.
Right.
And oftentimes we really can't help it. It's almost involuntary. It comes from a very deep and primal place. And I think the reason we care so much about sports is because it's a space where we can practice these things, where we can emote, where we can feel, where we can actually be in a space where we're real. We don't have a lot of spaces like that in human life. I think the kind of more prescriptive piece that I would throw in is, okay, so it's that way. Can we bring to the surface more consciousness about what that means for us? Instead of kind of mistaking the sport itself for the everything, can we put it in a broader context and say, this really is a chance for me to practice some things about what's important to me.
Right.
It really is a chance for me to live into life or my family or my community or my team in a different way. I think the awareness of the kind of import of it gives us a chance to use it for something, again, more constructive.
Right, am I going
Yeah,
again?
go ahead.
Or do you want to move on?
Yes,
or do
let's
you
move
wanna
on to
say-
the next
okay.
topic.
There's so many different ones. We're kind of like, how much time do
I
we
did,
spend?
while
We
you,
wanna
while
get
you
to
gather yourself,
everything.
I did love the fact that when you talked about the fans, that you went and you spent some time wearing headphones and listening to gospel music. That didn't
Yes.
work real well, though, for a long time.
Well, it just felt like a lot of those things that detached me from the goings on of the stadium detached me from somebody I love.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do that. And, John doesn't get to wear headphones and listen to gospel music,
He does wear headphones.
He
Yeah.
does wear headphones, but there ain't gospel music
Yeah,
on there. So I really, it's out of devotion to him that I want to stay connected to that world and do it in a way that has integrity for me.
One of the next, I think it was actually the next chapter in the book. You called it "Man Up." It was essentially sexism, a sexism chapter, which I found particularly interesting for probably obvious reasons. Being a female in a male-dominated, sports journalism world, and hoping there's challenges in that. And I hope that I think the perception is that maybe women in this business will never change, but I hope that's not true. But I think you posed some interesting questions, and I'm not going to go into all of them because that would be a lot. But you wondered how much does sport lean on gender extremes to function, and does sports depend on gender stereotypes that prop up particular expressions of masculinity? I mean, a lot of really interesting things. I think in your experience and with football specifically, have you been able to maintain your integrity as a woman and in that kind of hyper masculine world? I know people have asked you that, right?
Yes.
Is it difficult to do?
Well, I tell in the book how one of my professors in graduate school, who was a feminist theologian, when I told her that I was marrying a football coach, was very disappointed. I think I talk about that in the introduction, that she said, "I'm so disappointed. You're wasting your life." So there is that kind of noise that's because of the guild that I'm in, that that somehow this does threaten my integrity as a theologian, as someone with training in feminist theory, that I couldn't possibly be with this world
Right.
and maintain my integrity. I will be honest, it's hard sometimes. It really is. And this book is really a part of that work for me, is bringing to bear the questions that are really important to me, not just vocationally, but as a human being, and not somehow letting sports occupy this kind of exception in my life and don't interrogate it the same way that you interrogate other things. So I feel like that's what my book is saying, I want to bring this framework to bear on my whole life, not just parts of it.
Do you feel like there are signs that it's going to change in football? I mean, I feel like generationally, at least with the kids that I deal with, and obviously college athletes, but there's they're getting older. I'm getting older.
We're all getting
We're all
old.
Yes.
getting older.
But obviously we're seeing these new kids kind of come in every year, and I feel like, at least in terms of my profession, and they seem to accept it more, if that's the right term. But do you think on a kind of bigger football scale that that's ever going to change, or there's always going to be kind of this mentality when it comes to football and women?
I think it has to change.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're seeing right now in the world of football, from the top to the bottom,
Right.
is there are different pressure points. Some of it's concussions, some of it's, kind of homophobia or bullying or domestic violence. And so I think that there are all these different places that are pressing in on the world of football to kind of do a gut check. So I have no preconceived idea about what it would need to look like, but I do think change must come for football to thrive and maybe even survive. There's some people that would suggest that, it's not going to be able to survive in its current form. And I hope that's not, I hope it's not true. I love the game of football. But I do think change must come, or it will start to languish.
Well, one of the things you mentioned too is the fact that maybe not in television numbers you don't see it, but you do see it with the kids your children's age, and parents that are thinking twice, not for a number of different reasons, maybe not just the sexism issue, but there may be the concussion issue, the safety issue about having kids play football, and that could have an impact down the road.
Yeah, I think it already is having an impact, and I think what we're seeing with the Ray Rice situation and that conversation is, yes, it hasn't cut down on the number of people that are watching the NFL, but it really is kind of sharpening some of the questions that we're all asking. And I think that's where culture change happens, is when these conversations go to a deeper level. And that's what's happening. That's what's happening now, and I think it's a good thing.
So in that pleasant Southern voice, you would and you were in the room with Roger Goodell, what would you ask him?
Well, I would want to have a pretty personal conversation with him about the way he understands change. And I think if he really is committed to making a change in the NFL around domestic violence, he has to look in the mirror at the way he uses power in the workplace, the way he shares and abuses power in the workplace. And trainings about domestic violence are great. And I would say that's a really important kind of emergency room step, stop the bleeding, do some trainings. But I would say the next step is more of a wellness step, and that is to really do a power analysis of the way things work in the NFL and how different voices are given power in that equation. And not just women's voices, but also people of color and people who have different ideas and different experiences. And I think the players' union in the NFL is very powerful and is able to put pressure on the way things work. And that's a good thing, but it also is sort of an adversarial way of creating change. And I think there's some other ways to make change. And if he's really serious about it, I would say, I hope we can talk some more and, continue the conversation.
And on your website, your blog, you actually had an open letter to Roger Goodell, so
yes.
MarciaMountShoop.com, right?
Yes,
So
MarciaMountShoop.com, and that letter actually went viral, and I got contacted by CNN and the New York Times and several other agencies also that help women who have been victims and survivors of domestic violence. I don't know that it ever got to Roger Goodell, which, but in that letter I say that I really hope he keeps his job, because I feel like his fumbling and bumbling and the way he's, kind of making mistakes and trying to, as he said, get it right, is a really good mirror for our culture, because nobody's getting it right. Nobody's getting it right.
One of the interesting things among many in your book was just the whole, you went through a difficult situation at North Carolina where the boss, Butch Davis, loses his job and your husband continues to coach through the rest of the year. And there's much in the book detailed about that situation. But my question is about coming to Purdue. Now, you sit out a year, and you obviously had decisions to make as a family. Maybe things like, do I want to get back into coaching or get back into this life? Why was Purdue interesting in terms of, and did you have to vet Purdue, so to speak, and say, is this a good match for the Shoop family in terms of that?
Well, that's a whole set of questions, and those are great questions. And I think the first thing is that when John and I decided together that he would take a year off of coaching, that's a huge job. Yeah. That's a huge decision for a coach, because they are addicts. Yeah. I mean, they really are, and it was a tough year for him. Yeah. I mean, he really did miss it a ton. But we did that for a reason, with a certain intentionality. And it was to honor the promises we made, especially that he made, to the young men that he recruited to come to the University of North Carolina. That he would be there for them, that we would be their family, that we would make sure they were okay. And we really felt like that wasn't being tended to. And so we wanted to honor those promises. So we stayed to be advocates for those players and to ask some hard questions of the university and that community. And we had some great conversations that year. John even went up to D.C. and did some lobbying with some folks up there about players' rights. And we got to meet a lot of new people and make a lot of great new friendships. And so in that way, it was a valuable year. But if there's one thing that was clear at the end of it is you need to go back to work. You need to get back into the work that you love. And he was very ready. He had several interviews, lots of things that looked promising and that were interesting, but when Purdue came along, when Coach Hazel called, that rose to the top very quickly. John has a lot of respect for Coach Hazel and has for a long, long time. Purdue is a great school. We also like the fact that it's a rebuilding situation. And we felt like there were so many factors here that made this a really, really promising situation. And the winter notwithstanding.
Yeah, which could have sent you right back home. Yeah.
This has been a great place to be. And I was telling Stacy before, our kids love it here. John loves his coworkers. I love the other wives. It's a great setup. And so, yes, we're not fools. We check things out. But I think Coach Hazel, the school just made a huge, great get there with Daryl Hazel.
Gosh, we're not going to get to anything.
That's all right. Yeah, we'll have her on again.
That was kind of, that's when you're reading the book, you're like, oh, this and this and this and this. And it's like, one thing that I did want to ask you about, I think it was in the chapter on higher education, I'm not sure exactly, but you had mentioned obviously stakes are really high for coaches and players and universities at this level, where you have people working to keep these kids
Eligible.
Yes,
Yeah.
eligible. And you think that potentially that can replace life-giving learning. So my question is, should there not be an academic standard, do you think, for athletes then? I mean, do you treat them differently in that way, or how does that, I guess, relationship be better?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think it's a complicated situation. And one of the things I try to do in the higher education chapter is look at it through the lens of race and privilege. Because that has really informed a lot of the approach. And we've tended to think that the way to fix a problem is to tighten standards or to, tighten our methods of keeping people eligible. But in our experience, what we've seen is that actually can diminish the academic experience because you've replaced the goal of life-giving learning and a player really taking classes that they love and they're interested in with, we just want you to be able to play on Saturdays. And so that's bound to create some conflicts of assignment, as John would say. And so I'm not saying that there shouldn't be academic standards, because I think the players are students.
Right.
They are students, and they are also generating a lot of income for the university. So they do have kind of a unique context and situation, but they're students, so they should have standards. However, I think that when we are talking about academic growth and learning in diverse communities, we need to be able to meet students where they are. And we do that with students in a lot of other contexts, like with international students for whom English is not their first language, or students that have other really special skills in music or art. Why can't we meet athletes where they are and not say that's wrong? I don't understand that. I really don't understand how they've gotten placed in a different category altogether. And I do think they're the ones that get harmed by that. And so as an advocate for players, I want to say eligibility is not great for players. It's not the best route for them to get a life-giving education.
I mean, and there You're right. There's a whole other topic
keep like, oh, I
have
wanna
about
go this way,
19
but we don't have
questions
time to
on,
do that. Wait.
on Carolina on down the line. Again, without you having, I know you're only going to reveal what you want to reveal, but your late night discussions with your husband on workload. And how much he works, well, and the focus on coaches and what's expected of them, is that more frequent, less frequent, or is that a part of a healthy marriage in terms of having to just discuss whether your spouse is a football coach or whether your spouse is an insurance salesman? How does that, are you finding more of those or less of those as your marriage goes on?
Less.
Okay.
We're still married.
Yeah.
So we've been married for almost 20
Yeah.
years. It was a tough adjustment because my dad was a college professor,
Yeah.
so he was, he worked a lot, but he was home
Yeah.
more. And so there were times when I felt like something was wrong, that he was working so much. But I think we both have more and more peace about why that is and what that is for our family. And I think John has also gotten wiser about what's healthy,
Yeah.
he goes to bed
Yeah.
a lot earlier than he used to. What used to be 2 a.m. is now more like 10 p.m.
Yeah.
He gets into work really early, but it used to be earlier.
Yeah.
So there's signs that he too is kind of looking at that and thinking about diminishing returns, and I think all coaches are challenged with that. It's a crazy grind. But as far as our late night discussions, honestly, they're not about workload.
He's asleep, apparently.
They're not about workload ever.
Good.
They're really not. They're more about how can we kind of button up the day in a way that feels positive to both of us, because we both have a lot of
Energy.
stuff coming at us, in a lot of different ways. So often if I'm asking him questions about players or stuff on the team, he'll say, can we talk about something else for a few minutes? I need to sleep,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was joking with her over there. How do you feel about Raheem Mostert?
Yeah.
No, but we're not
We're
gonna
not asking her
Oh,
those questions.
we're
I
not
want to
gonna-
know those.
Go Raheem.
Yeah. That's a good answer. Good answer. And if you know Raheem, you like Raheem.
Yes.
Absolutely.
All of the players are great people. They really are.
One of in our time, we're going over a little, but I wanted, and this is almost a difficult question to ask in a short period, but we talked also about racism and the difficulties there. Your suggestions for combating that in not only in the whole sphere of college athletics, but also how we deal with it as a society. There are some that would say it's improved since the 1960s. It's getting better, but what do we need to continue to do to make that even a better situation, do you feel?
Yeah, I think the next step for our country is really a deeper intentionality about looking at whiteness. We've tended to look at things like civil rights and the experience of oppression, and I don't think we've done a perfect job at that, but we haven't done a really good job of talking about, so what's the payoff of racism been? And how have white people benefited? Not even if you're not an active racist. This is the air we breathe. We live in a culture in which race has had a payoff. And so how can white people start to enter into the conversation with more self-awareness? And not shame or guilt, but the ability to be honest, the ability to be truthful, the ability to ask questions of ourselves. And so I think that probably the next big step is an intentionality around race and privilege. And how have those two things worked together to create things like our justice system, our educational system, the way we, kind of unconsciously respond to certain people. These things aren't about culpability. They're just about reality and the way that things work in America. So that would be the next step, I would say, for us.
It's a good answer on it when it's such a wide open question.
Probably just to wrap it up, yeah?
Yeah. You can have one more question. Go
I think
ahead.
just kind of generally, what has the response been? Have you gotten kind of out of it what you wanted to get out of it, if that makes sense? Or you're hoping to build what student athlete human rights project you're involved in now too as well. So it seems like there's kind of giving you more opportunities
Right.
after this.
I think my hope was a deeper conversation. So I'm so thankful for this one. I'm looking forward to more. I'm remembering fondly the ones I've had. Generally, the response has been strong and it's been positive, you know.
Positive part's good. I didn't
yeah.
know where you were going after
Yeah.
so strong.
You know, there's some people who are a little twitchy about the book, and they tend to live down south
Yeah.
in the Carolinas, but they probably haven't read it, you know, all the way through. And I'm going there in a few weeks
Are you?
to do some community events and conversations there. But generally, I'll say I just pray for more conversations, for more opportunities. I think it's a challenge sometimes to invite the sports world into a deep conversation because we are more kind of in the moment and we like to move on to the next exciting, glittery thing. And this would involve us to slow down
Yeah.
a little bit. So it's been good, and I hope it'll get better.
All right, well, we will continue this conversation at some point down the road because there's plenty more to talk. I really do recommend just for a holistic view, and Stacy's
Thank
holding it
you.
up because one of the things she said, touchdowns for Jesus, which we didn't even touch on that chapter, which isn't exactly what you would think, but it's a really interesting chapter. But lifting the veil on big time sports is the subhead to this.
Yeah, there it is.
And again, well put together, and again, you are someone that's very easy to talk to, and that's a
Well,
good
thank
thing.
you.
And we
Thank
enjoy that
you.
very much.
And so are you.
Well, thank you. That's good. That's the first good
And
thing.
so are you.
Stacey-
Thank you.
and Brian and Kyle are as
This
well.
is the first time I've
Yeah.
ever talked to him.
Yeah.
I knew you were easy to talk
Okay.
to.
So, well, we appreciate that very much, and we will do that down the road. So, a couple bits of housekeeping. Next week, our show 1 p.m. will be at Mackey Arena. Coach Matt Painter will be our guest, along with
For the first of many times.
First of many
Yes,
times that we made
yes.
that clear. And also Raphael Davis, that we think is lined up as well to join us in one of the segments. We'll be talking basketball and Purdue, Illinois football. And as Marcia would be saying, maybe after a Purdue victory tomorrow. So that's what...
Boiler up.
Yeah, there you go. We want to thank our sponsors, Hilton Garden Inn, Triple X, John Basham, and of course, State Farm agent Trent Johnson. You can watch if you missed this and you really do want to see the entire show today. We'll have it divided up in segments on WLFI.com and goldenblack.com for you to review from now until the end of time. So that's what you can do. All right, well, thank you all for joining us. I want to thank Kim and Gordon and Allie, the folks at WLFI, for all their help as always, and we look forward to seeing you next week, special time, 1 o'clock on the October 3rd edition of Golden Black Live.